The wind howled through the canyons like a pack of starving wolves. It was supposed to be a routine ride, just a few miles to check on the fence line before the worst of the storm hit. But as Abigail Thorn clutched her shawl tighter and urged her horse forward, the sky grew darker, the snow heavier, and the trail more treacherous. She'd grown up tough, raised by a father who ran cattle with more grit than grace. But even grit had its limits in weather like this, and she wasn't alone on the trail. He was supposed to marry her, but instead, Luther Kane now rode behind her with fury in his eyes. He had once called her his salvation. Now, he called her a liability. He claimed she'd ruined him, that her refusal to go along with his scheme had cost him land, money, and reputation. Abigail hadn't run from him because she was afraid. She ran because she knew what he was capable of. And now, somehow, he had found her again, out here, miles from any soul, in the middle of a blizzard. They reached the cliff's edge. The snow whipped around them, erasing the path behind, clouding everything ahead. Abigail turned, face pale but steady. "This is where it ends," she said. Luther's voice was calm, too calm. "You're right about that." He stepped forward. She didn't have time to react. A push, a scream, and then nothing but wind and white. Down she fell. The storm swallowed her. The world vanished. And somewhere far below the cliff's edge, beneath a canopy of snow-laden pine and stone, a breath, a flutter of fingers, a groan, a heartbeat. Abigail Thorn had survived. Barely. But what lay ahead was something far more than survival. The storm had quieted, but the cold still bit like a blade. Somewhere deep in the snow-covered forest, a man named Elias Blackthorn stood at the edge of his small timber cabin, hat pulled low, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the tree line. He wasn't one to pray, not anymore. But when he saw the bundle of red fabric twisted in the snow below the ridge, the splash of color against the white, he thought for a moment he was seeing a ghost. Elias had lived in these mountains alone for over 7 years. No neighbors, no townfolk, no visitors. He'd traded his name for silence and his past for solitude. But when he reached the motionless figure, collapsed near the broken pine, and turned her over gently, she was alive. Frost clung to her lashes, her lips were cracked and blue, her breath shallow, but still there, and around her wrist, a torn piece of lacing, worn and stained. He carried her through the snow like something sacred. The fire in his cabin burned low, but he stoked it high, wrapped her in his furs, melted snow to wet her lips, waited, watched. When she opened her eyes for the first time 3 days later, he was seated across from her, silent, cautious, like a man watching a miracle unfold. Abigail tried to speak, but her throat burned. "Where?" she whispered. "You're safe," he answered. "That's all that matters." She tried to sit up. Pain shot through her ribs. He didn't move to help her. He simply said, "Whoever put you over that edge didn't count on you being this stubborn." She flinched. The memory returned like a whip. Luther, his eyes, the snow, the fall. Abigail turned away, trembling. Elias rose, fetched a pot of broth, and set it before her. "You've got a story," he said, without judgment. "I won't ask, but if you want to tell it, I'll listen." Outside, the snow kept falling. But inside that small cabin, surrounded by stone and stillness, something had shifted. Not just the storm, but something else. the beginning of something neither of them expected. The days passed slowly in the hollow. Abigail regained her strength little by little. Her body still ached, her ribs wrapped tight, but the warmth of Elias's cabin and his quiet, careful presence brought a comfort she hadn't known in a long time. He wasn't a talkative man, but he noticed everything. He made tea from pine needles when she coughed, moved silently through the cabin like he'd always been alone, but never made her feel like an intruder. When she tried to lift firewood too soon, he said, without looking, "You're not here to prove anything, you're here to heal." They fell into a rhythm. She would sit by the fire, stitching old cloth into usable shape. He would clean his traps, check his rifles, chop wood with sleeves rolled up, face hard as iron. But when he smiled, those rare, fleeting smiles, something in Abigail softened. One night, while a quiet snow whispered against the window, she asked the question that had been burning in her for days. "Why do you live out here, alone?" Elias hesitated. Then he said plainly, "Because I once did something I didn't know how to forgive myself for." She looked into his eyes. He didn't blink. "And this place?" she asked. "It doesn't judge, doesn't ask questions. And me?" He glanced away, then back. "You haven't judged me either." She nodded, heart quiet but pounding. She hadn't told him what had happened yet. Not about Luther, not about the betrayal, not about the fall. But in his silence she felt something rare. Safety. Not the kind you run to, the kind you want to build around. Later that night, as she lay in bed, the fire crackling low and steady, she heard it. A sound, faint, far. A hoof, then two, somewhere out in the snow. Abigail's breath caught. "Luther?" Her body froze. But then, Elias was already up, rifle in hand, eyes at the window. He didn't speak, but in the way he stood, the way he shielded the cabin with his body, Abigail knew something. No one would hurt her again while he still had breath. Elias moved like a wolf, silent, certain, deadly when he had to be. He stepped onto the porch, boots crunching softly over frozen boards, his rifle steady in his hands. The snow whispered, but gave nothing away. Behind him, Abigail stood in the doorway, wrapped in one of his coats. Her face was pale, but her voice was calm. "It's him." Elias didn't ask who. He just gave a slow nod. "How many would he bring?" "He doesn't trust anyone," she said, "just his gun." That was both a comfort and a threat. The night passed with no more sounds. But at dawn, Elias found the tracks, fresh, deep, one horse. He followed them down the ridge until they vanished behind a frozen bluff, a place Elias never took anyone near. And when he came back, something had changed in his eyes. Abigail noticed. "You've been here longer than anyone, haven't you?" she asked. Elias set down his rifle. "Long enough to know when something doesn't belong." He looked at her, steady. "And tell me everything." She did. The fiancé who turned cruel, the threat he made, the deal he tried to drag her into, and the moment at the cliff's edge when love died and survival began. Elias didn't interrupt, didn't flinch, just listened. When she finished, she felt emptied, but lighter. Then he asked, soft, "Did you think dying would be easier than running?" She didn't answer right away, then whispered, "I thought, if I didn't survive, at least he wouldn't win." Elias stepped close. "You surviving? That's how he loses." That night, Abigail lit the fire herself. Elias cleaned his rifle again, not because it needed it, but because he needed something to do with his hands. Outside, the snow returned. So did the fear. But for the first time, it didn't control her. At midnight, a knock echoed through the hollow. 3 taps, slow, measured, not from the front door, from the back wall, where there was no door. Abigail froze. Elias stood. Both of them knew he had come, and he had not come alone. The knock came again. 3 slow, steady raps, then silence. Elias didn't flinch. He placed his rifle down gently on the table, then turned to Abigail. "There's no back door," he said. "Not unless someone made one." Abigail's breath hitched. She'd lived too long under Luther's shadow to mistake that rhythm. He was toying with them, hunting her like she was still prey. Elias opened the trapdoor under the floorboards, an old root cellar half frozen and full of empty crates. "Get in," he said. "No," Abigail replied. "I won't hide again, not from him." Their eyes locked. It wasn't defiance. It was resolve. Outside, a figure paced the cabin. The hoofbeats came first, then boots, and then the voice. "Abigail," it drawled, soft, sweet, poison through snow. "I knew you'd survive. You always were too stubborn to die easy." Elias stepped into the doorway, rifle in hand, his body blocking the light from inside. "Turn back," he called out. "This land doesn't belong to you." Luther Kane laughed. "Then I'll take what does." It happened fast. Luther drew, but Elias didn't shoot first. He tackled Abigail to the ground, shielding her with his body as bullets shattered the window. The fire cracked, glass sprayed. Snow rushed in like breath from the mountain itself. Elias rolled, lifted the rifle, fired once. A scream. Hoofbeats scrambling. Silence. When it was over, Abigail pulled herself up, eyes wide. "You could have shot him first." Elias, bleeding from a gash on his shoulder, leaned against the wall and said, "I didn't want to kill someone in front of you. Even him." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said that to her, not even close. They found blood in the snow, tracks leading away. Luther wasn't dead, but he wasn't finished either. Elias bandaged his arm. Abigail stoked the fire. Neither of them said it, but both knew he would come back. And next time, he might not be alone. But for the first time, they wouldn't run. Not anymore. They had a reason to stay. The morning came gray and hushed. Elias sat on the porch, his arm freshly bandaged, steam rising from the tin mug between his hands. Abigail stood just inside the door, watching him. Not the wound, but the man. He hadn't asked her to stay. Not once. But he hadn't needed to. The safety he gave her wasn't in his words. It was in how he listened, how he moved, how he placed himself between her and danger without ever asking why it followed her. She sat down beside him, pulling his coat tighter around her shoulders. "I know he'll come back," she said. Elias nodded slowly. "So do I." A pause. Then, "You could go, pack your things, head south, start over." Abigail didn't answer right away. She looked out across the trees, no longer the prison they'd once felt like. "I did run. I ran until I fell off a cliff." She glanced at him. "And now I'm here, with someone who didn't ask me to be less, didn't try to own me, didn't see me as weak for breaking." Her voice caught. "I don't want to run anymore." Elias looked at her, eyes dark but warm. "Then we make this place ours. And if he comes back, we make sure he never comes again." The next few days, they worked side by side. They built stronger shutters, secured the cellar door, stored more wood. Elias even showed her how to use a rifle, not because he wanted her to fight, but because he knew she deserved the choice. Abigail was a quick learner. She smiled more. So did he. And then, one morning, as snow gave way to frost and the mountains seemed less cruel, they woke to find hoof prints in the clearing. Not just one, 3. Elias stood silent for a long moment. He's bringing men. Abigail stepped beside him. Then let them come. Her voice didn't shake, and neither did his when he said, "They'll regret ever laying eyes on this cabin." But even as they prepared, neither of them knew. Luther's next move wouldn't be guns. It would be fire and betrayal from someone they never expected. The wind shifted that evening, not from the north, where danger had always come, but from the south, from the woods behind the cabin, where only deer and wind ever wandered. Elias stood near the porch, his hand resting on the old rifle like it had grown there. Abigail was inside, slicing dried apples, the air between them full of quiet. Then the scent came. Smoke, not from the chimney, not from the hearth, from the trees. Elias moved fast. "Stay inside," he barked. But Abigail had already grabbed the rifle he'd taught her to load. She stepped onto the porch beside him, eyes locked on the rising line of smoke curling between the trunks. "It's him," she said. Her voice didn't shake. Not this time. "Not just him," Elias muttered, narrowing his eyes. He wouldn't risk fire if he planned to walk away clean. And then a voice from the tree line. A woman's. "Abigail?" Abigail froze. She knew that voice, knew it like a scar. "Cassie?" Out from the trees stepped her cousin, the one who disappeared a year ago after siding with Luther in a bitter land dispute. Cassie looked worn, pale, but her eyes burned with something harder than survival. "You should have stayed gone," she said. "He was ready to let you be until you dragged him through snow and fire to get you back." Abigail's heart raced. "You're helping him." "He helped me when no one else would. Now I'm returning the favor." A second figure appeared behind Cassie. Luther, scarred from Elias's bullet, wearing a twisted grin. "I offered you a good life, Abby. I would have given you anything. But you had to go running off to the mountains, playing house with a ghost." He stepped closer. "Now I'm burning this place to the ground. You can either walk out or die in it." Elias stepped forward, calm and steady. "You come through that line of trees, and you won't leave breathing." Luther sneered. "You still think you're a hero, don't you?" "No," Elias replied, "but I've buried worse men than you, and I know how to dig fast." Then came the crack, not of a gun, but of fire leaping tree to tree behind the cabin. He hadn't started it as a threat. He'd started it as a promise. Abigail turned to Elias. He looked at her. In that single moment, everything that had broken in her life clicked back into place. She wasn't the girl thrown from a cliff anymore. She was the woman standing her ground. The flames crackled behind them, growing louder, closer, licking the tree line like a beast unchained. Cassie had vanished into the smoke. Luther stood alone now, revolver drawn, his coat flapping in the gusts stirred by heat and wind. Abigail stepped forward first. She didn't raise the rifle. Didn't need to. Her voice cut through the air. "You threw me off a cliff, Luther, but you didn't bury me." He laughed once, sharp, joyless. "You should have stayed dead." Elias stood beside her, calm as snowfall, his rifle raised but steady, not shaking. "Put the gun down," he said. "Walk away." "You think this is about a woman?" Luther sneered. It's about what was mine. She was mine. Abigail lifted her chin. No, Luther, I was never yours. And now you're standing between me and the only man who never tried to own me. The wind shifted again. The fire roared, jumping closer. Ash rained like black snow. Luther fired first. The shot cracked the air, but missed. Elias fired once. Luther spun, dropped, and didn't rise again. Smoke choked the clearing. Trees groaned and cracked in the heat. Elias turned to Abigail. The horses, go, I'll catch up. But she grabbed his hand. No, together. They ran. Through the trees, through the fire's edge, through the smoke that blurred the world into embers and instinct. They didn't stop until the hollow was behind them and dawn was in front. They collapsed near the creek, the world quiet but breathing. So were they. Abigail leaned into him, face streaked with soot, heart pounding. You stayed. Elias brushed her hair back. You rose. Later, when the snow began to fall again, clean, soft, slow, they sat by a new fire under open sky. The cabin was gone. But what had been built between them hadn't burned. It had been forged, and it would never break. Spring came late to the mountains that year. The snow lingered longer, clinging to rocks and memory alike. But with it came something else too, a quiet beginning born from the ashes of what had nearly destroyed them both. Elias and Abigail had no cabin now, no hearth, no roof but the sky. And yet they were home. They built a new shelter near the creek, not as big, not as fortified, but stronger in ways they could feel with their hands, their laughter, their silences. Abigail didn't flinch at thunder any more, and Elias smiled more often, never wide, never loud, but with a steadiness she trusted more than any promise. They planted roots in soil and in each other. One morning, as she gathered water, Abigail heard hoofbeats in the distance. Her hand went instinctively to the pistol at her side. She still carried it, not because of fear, but because of memory. From the trees emerged a single rider, a woman, Cassie, but not the woman who had once betrayed her. Cassie dismounted slowly, hat in hand, eyes down. I didn't light the fire, she said softly, but I didn't stop it either. Abigail said nothing. Cassie looked up. He used me, lied to me, and when I saw what he planned for you, her voice cracked. I knew. I just didn't know how to stop it. Abigail stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, but full. Then don't run anymore. Cassie nodded. I have no place to go. Elias stepped out from the cabin, arms crossed. Abigail turned slightly. You do now. In the weeks that followed, the cabin grew. So did the garden, the warmth, the peace. What had begun in blood and blizzard was now rooted in something deeper than survival. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Elias took Abigail's hand. You ever think it was the fall that brought us here? She smiled. No, it wasn't the fall, it was the climb back up, and who I found at the top. He kissed her then, slow, certain, like a man who knew exactly what he almost lost, and what he'd fight to keep forever.